Ricoseta Mafella. He flew the last flight to leave Indonesia's Palu airport before disaster struck. Now, safely on board the plane.
Then Mafella wondered if it was just his imagination or something else. Regardless, he obeyed what he had heard.
Captain Ricoseta Mafella's name first surfaced in global headlines after a string of events in September 2018 around Palu, Indonesia. That moment, when an earthquake struck shortly after his plane lifted off, would forever cast him into the public imagination as a pilot whose quick decisions seemed to defy logic and perhaps even fate. But behind that dramatic snapshot lies a more layered story, one of faith, intuition, duty, and the mysteries that sometimes lie hidden in life's split-second choices. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. He was flying for Batik Air as captain of Flight 6231, carrying 148 people, when an inner voice prompted him to request takeoff 3 minutes ahead of schedule. Though there was no visible emergency and the airport sequence was still underway, he urged the ground crew to hurry and secured clearance from the tower. The aircraft rolled down the runway and became airborne at 18:02 local time, a mere heartbeat before the ground below ruptured in a 7.5 magnitude earthquake. The runway cracked, debris flew, and chaos reigned across Palu. Yet Mafella's plane was already climbing into safety. From that moment, his life was no longer just the life of a commercial pilot. He became a focal point for debate. Was this intuitive action the result of faith, human instinct, divine intervention, or mere chance? He himself leaned toward the supernatural. He spoke openly about hearing a voice, a prompting he believed was from the Holy Spirit, telling him simply, "Be quick, get out." When the earthquake struck, Mafella says he noticed violent movements on the runway, as though the ground were flexing like a curtain. Once airborne and climbing to about 1,500 feet, he attempted radio contact. But the tower offered no reply. Its control tower was cracking and swaying. Later, when his flight reached about 8,000 feet, he watched from his window as white circular waves grew along the coastline of Palu and Donggala, massive disks of surf expanding, the first signs of what would become a tsunami. Back at the airport, the air traffic controller Anthonius Gunawan Agung remained at his console. He delayed fleeing until he'd confirmed Mafella's flight was safely cleared. Then, when the building collapsed, he plunged out of the tower, suffering fatal injuries. His final act: Batik 6231 runway 33 clear for takeoff, became his legacy. For Mafella, Agung was his guardian angel, someone who gave his life so the flight might depart in safety. It is tempting to reduce this story to a simple miracle escape, and certainly many have. But deeper examination reveals tensions between reason and faith, between what can be measured and what must be felt. Several voices in media treated his account skeptically, questioning whether the voice was psychological, perhaps the result of stress or intuition sharpened by years of experience. Others embraced it wholeheartedly as evidence of direct divine intervention. Mafella, for his part, saw no tension. For him, the Holy Spirit simply intervened in that moment. He has spoken later about past brushes with death. Before Palu, he says, he had survived a church bombing, severe illness, and a near car crash. But none of those moments had the clarity he felt on that runway. In those earlier episodes, he said, fear had gripped him. In Palu, by contrast, he says he was filled with calm, even as he rushed to escape. After the event, his testimony spread rapidly across Christian communities and general media alike. He described how God calculated the process accurately, and that the Holy Spirit took custody of his decision, leading him exactly when to depart. His Instagram and social media posts paid tribute to Agung. The narrative became one of divine precision, that if his plane had delayed even by seconds, it might have been destroyed on the tarmac. Skeptics pointed out that there was no scientific way to confirm that inner voice as divine. They noted that pilots operate under constant pressure. Sometimes gut feelings emerge. Was this case different only because it turned out so dramatically? Some suggested that after the fact, memory reshapes narrative to align with faith. Yet even those critiques often grudgingly acknowledge the power of the story. For many, what matters is not proof but witness. In one account, Mafella said he felt something odd in the last seconds of the runway roll, a shifting sensation under the tires, a subtle trembling. Because the technical instruments had not warned him, that sensation was dismissed by many as illusion, but in his telling, it was real. As he called ground crew to speed up, he ignored protocol inertia. Even in the cockpit, he personally took over tasks usually left to co-pilot or crew to push forward. They requested expedited clearance. He moved faster than he ordinarily would. As they climbed, he had no certainty what unfolding events lay below. But when he saw the waves growing on the ocean, he understood that catastrophe was arriving just behind them. Those shapes, he realized, were not benign. He sensed disaster, a tsunami taking form. He turned toward Makassar, where he would eventually land, safe. When he arrived an hour later, he learned the full scale of destruction. That night, the passengers and crew initially had no idea how narrowly they had escaped. Only when news broke, images showed the cracked runway and wrecked terminal, and communities reported massive casualties, did it become clear. For many survivors, Mafella's flight became symbolic, not of hero worship, but of the tension between human frailty and mystery. In the years since, the story has gained new life in changing contexts. It has been retold in blogs, newspapers, social media, and Christian media platforms. Some call him the pilot who flew out just before the apocalypse. Others stress his humility. He affirms that he was not special. He just listened. He still returns to the memory of the moment when everything felt aligned. To critics who argue that hindsight turns intuition into prophecy, Mafella sometimes responds that he doesn't need to convince them. He says he has seen enough to know that there is something beyond what instrumentation can capture. He doesn't regard faith and technical precision as contradictory, they cohabit. In every flight, he says, pilots must balance data, experience, and sometimes the whispers within. His name, now attached to the flight and the tragedy below, makes him more than a pilot. He is, for many, a reminder that human decisions sometimes dwell in a liminal space between fact and faith, between control and surrender. The story raises questions that do not yield to simple answers. How should controllers, pilots, and aviation systems acknowledge intuition? Is there space within protocol for moments of inner urgency? Or was his action an exceptional aberration, one that only succeeded because chance aligned with faith? Even in aviation circles, where skepticism is strong, his story has been cited as an unusual case. It is not evidence of a universal principle, but it does illustrate that humans are not reducible to instruments. The cockpit is not only mechanical, but moral and psychological. In a world where safety depends on redundancy and reliability, the notion of an inner prompting reserving final say feels dangerous to some, but for others, it is precisely what gives human agency its gripping weight. At its core, the story remains mysterious. No one can go back and alter those 3 minutes. No one can definitively prove whether it was divine guidance, psychological premonition, or a lucky guess backed by years of silent experience. What remains is gratitude that the plane was up when the earth broke beneath it. Many of the 4,300 or more who died in that quake and tsunami would have had no voice to recount their last moments. In contrast, Mafella lives. He recounts. He often says he doesn't claim to be heroic. He says he did only what he had to do, in the moment he had it. But for his passengers, crew, and the public, that moment defined his life's narrative. Captain Ricoseta Mafella is not just a figure in an aviation miracle story. He is a living crossroad between the seen and the unseen, between what machines record and what the human heart sometimes knows in an instant. Even now, when asked whether he would act the same way if he could go back, he expresses confident humility. He wouldn't hesitate, because he doesn't believe it was chance. He believes it was calculated by something beyond human calculation. And in that calculation, in that voice, some 148 lives followed him into safety. Captain Ricoseta Mafella's journey did not end with the miracle takeoff from Palu. It transformed his entire sense of purpose. Before that day, his life followed the rhythm of a pilot's existence: precision, repetition, procedure, and the endless hum of engines. But the moment he pushed the throttles forward and the earth tore open beneath him, something changed. His world, once defined by flight paths and coordinates, opened to a different kind of navigation, one that charted the unseen relationship between the human soul and divine intervention. In the aftermath of the quake, As the country mourned and aid convoys streamed toward central Sulawesi, Mafella found himself suspended between gratitude and guilt. Gratitude for the lives saved, guilt for those who could not escape. He often said later that the images haunted him: the cracked runway, the fallen tower, the homes reduced to splinters along the coast. Even as the nation hailed him as a symbol of miraculous timing, he could not silence the question that echoed in his heart: why him? And why those 3 minutes? His faith gave him one answer, but the enormity of the loss forced him to explore it from every angle. He began revisiting his career in aviation, replaying every takeoff and landing that had preceded that day. He realized that his instincts had been sharpening over years, not merely as professional reflexes, but as the quiet honing of spiritual perception. Flying had always been an act of trust: trust in instruments, trust in training, trust in unseen forces like lift and wind. But that trust had deepened now into something personal, a conviction that invisible guidance worked within those very laws of aerodynamics and human decision. He returned to work soon after the incident, but flying no longer felt the same. Every checklist seemed heavier with meaning. When he held the control column, he no longer saw only a machine. He saw the fragility of every moment in the sky. The hum of turbines became to him a kind of prayer. Colleagues noticed the change. He was quieter, more introspective, yet also more radiant in his confidence. He often told younger pilots that skill alone could never account for survival. Awareness, the kind that transcends data, was the ultimate safeguard. That awareness also changed how he engaged with passengers. Before the event, his pre-flight announcements were perfunctory: seatbelts, smoking restrictions, weather. Afterward, he spoke with warmth, adding small words of reassurance, sometimes even a brief blessing. To him, flying people was no longer a job, but a stewardship. He was not only carrying bodies through the air, he was carrying lives through uncertainty. In interviews, he described that shift with humility. Before Palu, he said, I flew because I loved the sky. After Palu, I fly because I love the people who trust me to take them there. That simple distinction captured his metamorphosis. His vocation, once technical, became pastoral in spirit. Many of his peers admired him, though a few quietly dismissed his story as superstition. Yet even skeptics admitted his composure and gentleness radiated something rare. As media interest grew, invitations arrived from churches, schools, and community organizations asking him to share his story. At first he resisted. He was a pilot, not a preacher. But he soon realized that silence would dishonor the mystery that had saved them. When he finally began to speak publicly, his accounts were vivid but unembellished. He would describe the hum in his chest, the urgency of the voice, the trembling of the earth glimpsed through cockpit glass. And then he would pause, letting listeners feel the enormity of what words could barely hold. The audiences responded not merely with applause, but with tears. For many Indonesians, his story arrived at a moment of collective despair. The Palu disaster had left thousands dead and tens of thousands displaced. Amid the rubble, Mafella's survival offered a fragment of meaning, a sign that not everything was chaos. His testimony, translated into local languages and shared across television and social media, became a national parable about courage and faith. He did not shy away from acknowledging fear. He recalled the shudder in his gut when he realized the radio had gone dead, the silence that replaced the controller's voice. That silence, he said, was like the moment between lightning and thunder. Yet even in that gap, he felt peace. He later learned that the controller, Anthonius Agung, had stayed at his post to ensure the flight's clearance. When he heard that Agung died from the fall after the tower collapsed, Mafella wept openly. For weeks, he could not sleep without seeing the young man's face in his mind. To honor Agung, he began speaking publicly about the unseen heroes of aviation, the controllers, mechanics, and engineers who protect lives from the ground. He visited Agung's family, bringing condolences and quiet prayers. He later said that meeting them was harder than the flight itself. It was where the miracle met the cost. The mother's tears, the father's quiet pride, and the sense of something larger than tragedy impressed upon him the depth of human sacrifice. The more he told his story, the more he realized it resonated beyond religion. Even secular audiences found in it a reminder of human intuition's power. Journalists, psychologists, and theologians debated his account. Some saw it as evidence of the subconscious gathering subtle cues. The slight change in air pressure, the uneasy energy before an earthquake. Others saw it as proof that faith can awaken parts of perception science cannot yet measure. He welcomed both interpretations, saying that if his experience encouraged anyone to listen more deeply, to themselves, to others, to the world, it had fulfilled its purpose. The days that followed Captain Ricoseta Mafella's narrow escape from Palu marked a turning point not only for his personal life, but for his entire worldview. In the immediate aftermath, as reports of devastation began pouring in, he found himself caught between relief and sorrow. Relief that his passengers and crew had survived, sorrow that so many others had not. The scale of destruction in Palu was staggering. Buildings flattened, streets ripped open, thousands missing. When he saw the first aerial footage, he said later, he could barely comprehend that the same runway he had taken off from minutes before had now split open like torn fabric. For days, he replayed the takeoff sequence in his mind. Each frame of memory was etched sharply. The sudden urge to accelerate departure, the slight trembling under the wheels, the moment the aircraft nose lifted. Pilots often rely on procedural rhythm. Everything follows a checklist, a cadence of mechanical certainty. Yet what struck him most was how natural his deviation had felt. He had not felt rebellious or irrational. There had been, as he described it, a certainty without proof, something gentle yet insistent pressing him to move. The absence of panic, the sense of calm urgency, was what convinced him that something larger was at work. When Batik Air officials conducted their routine debrief, the focus was procedural. Weather data, communications, timing. Nothing in the record suggested he had violated regulations. His decision to depart early had been within operational limits. Yet the timing proved uncanny. Later analysis by Indonesia's meteorological agency showed that seismic activity had already begun deep beneath the surface moments before his takeoff. Had he waited for the originally scheduled slot, his aircraft might have been on the ground during the first rupture, unable to lift off due to runway fractures. That knowledge haunted him. It also humbled him. Colleagues in the aviation community were divided in their reactions. Some congratulated him as a man of great instinct, a pilot who acted decisively when it mattered most. Others privately wondered if luck had simply favored him. But to Mafella, the conversation about luck felt too shallow. He often said afterward that he did not believe in luck, only in grace. This conviction became the heart of his public message. Within months, he was invited to churches, universities, and conferences to speak about the experience, not as a technical case study, but as a testimony about listening, about discernment in moments when reason and intuition converge. He began to notice that people responded to his story less because of the technical details and more because it touched something universal, the mystery of guidance. Whether one called it conscience, instinct, or divine voice, everyone had experienced moments of inexplicable knowing. For him, this realization brought purpose. Flying had always been his career, but now it became his platform for something larger. He said he wanted to remind people that faith and reason could coexist, that a pilot could be both professional and spiritual without contradiction. The transformation in his personal life was equally profound. He spoke about how the near tragedy made him reevaluate his priorities. The routine of flying, layovers, briefings, hotel rooms, endless routes, had once absorbed all his attention. After Palu, he began devoting more time to reflection and family. His wife, who had often worried about the risks of his job, noticed that he came home quieter, more present. He began writing notes after each flight, small reflections, reminders of gratitude. He also began mentoring younger pilots, emphasizing emotional balance as much as technical precision. He understood that the cockpit was not only a workplace, but also a crucible of decision-making where emotion, logic, and sometimes faith intersected. The Palu experience had shown him that procedures, though vital, could not encompass every situation. He urged his trainees to cultivate inner stillness, to learn when to trust data and when to sense patterns that data had not yet revealed. He would tell them that the difference between panic and intuition lay in peace. Panic shouts, intuition whispers. As the years passed, the story of that flight rippled outward, transcending religious lines. Even people with no belief in the supernatural found themselves moved by its human dimension, the courage to act quickly, amid uncertainty. Journalists revisiting the story found in it an archetype of modern heroism, one that did not depend on confrontation or violence, but on sensitivity and timing. Mafella's calm demeanor, his refusal to glorify himself, only deepened the impact. He often reflected on the air traffic controller, Anthonius Agung, who lost his life ensuring that his plane took off safely. In many interviews, he referred to Agung not merely as a colleague, but as a symbol of devotion. "He finished his duty," Mafella would say quietly, "even when duty meant death." That phrase stayed with listeners. It reminded them that heroism can appear in the quiet moments of professional integrity. The bond between pilot and controller, two strangers whose fates intertwined for a few seconds, became a poetic image of sacrifice and interdependence. When he attended memorial events for the Palu victims, Mafella would often speak of Agung first, not himself. He said that gratitude, if it did not lead to compassion, was incomplete. That belief turned his experience into something almost pastoral. He began organizing charity flights, donating part of his earnings to relief programs in Sulawesi. He saw these acts not as penance but as continuation, a way of carrying forward the mercy he felt had been shown to him and his passengers. The story also affected his relationship with flight itself. Every pilot knows the allure of the sky, the sense of control, of freedom, of separation from the unpredictable earth below. But after Palu, the sky became for him a sanctuary. Each ascent carried a reminder of that earlier escape, and with it, a renewed sense of humility. He began keeping a small Bible in the cockpit. During long routes, when the autopilot was on and the cabin lights dimmed, he would read a few verses quietly. It was not ritual so much as gratitude, a silent acknowledgement that flight is both science and surrender. As his fame spread, he faced the risk that the story might be commercialized or sensationalized. Some media outlets wanted to dramatize it with exaggerated supernatural language. Others tried to cast him as a prophet or miracle worker. He resisted both extremes. He said repeatedly that he was not special, only attentive. He disliked when stories portrayed him as having foreseen the quake. "I didn't know what was coming," he would clarify. "I just felt I had to move." That humility preserved the authenticity of his story. It reminded listeners that the extraordinary often hides inside the ordinary. In private moments, though, the memories still haunted him. He later confessed that for months after the quake, he would wake at night hearing phantom tremors, imagining the roar of collapsing structures. Survivor's guilt crept in, not because he had done something wrong, but because he had lived when so many hadn't. He began counseling with a pastor friend who reminded him that survival sometimes carries the obligation to witness. "You were kept alive to tell it," the pastor said. Those words reframed his grief into purpose. Over time, he learned to live with the dual weight of gratitude and memory. He could never erase the images of destruction, but he could honor them through service. He began participating in humanitarian aviation initiatives, flights that delivered supplies to remote disaster zones. Each mission felt like a redemption arc, returning to places broken by catastrophe, this time to help rebuild. He found that in giving aid, he quieted the restlessness that had followed him since Palu. When he spoke publicly, he often emphasized that faith did not mean immunity from fear. On the contrary, he described fear as part of awareness, the tremor before obedience. He would tell audiences that courage was not absence of fear, but alignment with purpose. This message resonated especially with young professionals who struggled to make decisions amid uncertainty. Many wrote to him, saying that his story had given them permission to trust their instincts in moments when logic alone felt insufficient. In those exchanges, he saw a wider pattern: the human hunger for meaning in randomness. Disasters, by their nature, confront people with the limits of control. By framing his escape not as a boast but as an encounter with mystery, Mafella gave people a language to reconcile those limits. He showed that humility and faith could coexist with professional rigor. The airline itself quietly recognized his contribution. Though they did not officially endorse the spiritual framing, they acknowledged his composure and quick thinking. Within industry circles, his decision to expedite takeoff was analyzed as a textbook example of situational awareness. Even stripped of spiritual interpretation, his timing had demonstrated exceptional alertness. But those who knew him personally sensed that the story could not be reduced to professional skill alone. There was a serenity in his eyes when he spoke about it, a conviction that transcended technical analysis. In quieter settings, he reflected on what the incident revealed about humanity's relationship with time. 3 minutes, such a small slice of existence, had separated life from death. That thought fascinated him. He often meditated on the fragility of time, how entire destinies can hinge on moments unnoticed. To him, it proved that awareness is sacred. Each decision, however small, contains infinite potential. This philosophical depth became central to his later talks. He would urge listeners not to dismiss inner nudges, not because every impulse is divine, but because attentiveness itself is a discipline that refines the soul. As the world gradually moved on from the Palu tragedy, Mafella's story continued to circulate online, sometimes distorted, sometimes accurately told. He accepted this with calm amusement. "Stories have their own wings," he said once. "You cannot control where they land." What mattered to him was that somewhere, someone might read it and pause long enough to listen inwardly. His life outside flying also evolved. He began composing songs and writing short reflections under the theme of faith and motion. He had always loved music. Now he used it to express the awe he felt toward the unseen patterns in life. Some of his compositions became popular in church gatherings, blending aviation metaphors with spiritual imagery, clouds as veils, runways as thresholds, flight paths as journeys of trust. Music became another cockpit for him, a space of navigation between known and unknown. He also developed a fascination with human stories of near misses, people who survived by seconds, who changed course by instinct. He collected such accounts and often referenced them in his talks to illustrate that divine guidance, if one believes in it, often manifests quietly. He wanted people to see that his experience was not an isolated miracle, but part of a vast tapestry of small redirections that shape human destiny. In one of his later interviews, he was asked what he would tell skeptics who dismissed his claim of hearing a voice. He smiled and said, "Even if you think it was only intuition, then honor intuition, because it saves lives." That statement captured his inclusive philosophy. He did not seek to convert others. He sought to awaken attentiveness. Over the years, his story also became a bridge between faith communities. Muslim and Christian audiences alike found inspiration in it, reading it through their own lenses of providence. In interfaith forums, he emphasized shared human values, gratitude, humility, courage, rather than doctrinal divides. He believed that the essence of spirituality was attentiveness to life's whispers, whatever name one gave the source. His modesty often disarmed cynics. He never adopted the grandeur that sometimes accompanies public recognition. He still saw himself first as a pilot, a servant of passengers, a steward of safety. The applause that followed his speeches embarrassed him. He would simply say, "All I did was listen." That refrain became a kind of mantra for those who heard him. As time passed, the memories softened, the nightmares lessened, replaced by calm reflection. Yet he remained acutely aware that every flight could become a test of attentiveness again. He never romanticized danger. Instead, he described flight as both privilege and responsibility, a reminder that each ascent depends on unseen hands, engineers, controllers, weather forecasters, and sometimes forces beyond comprehension. He also found meaning in mentoring new generations of pilots to integrate ethics and empathy into their profession. He taught that technical mastery without moral grounding could become arrogance, and that humility was an essential flight instrument, even if it had no physical dial. He encouraged his trainees to greet ground crews respectfully, to remember that aviation is a chain of trust extending far beyond the cockpit. The lesson of Palu, he said, was not just about hearing a divine voice, but about recognizing how every link in that chain carries lives. Beyond aviation, his story reached academic circles exploring human intuition. Psychologists cited his case as an example of the subconscious integrating multiple sensory cues faster than conscious reasoning. They argued that what he called the Holy Spirit might also be the culmination of accumulated pattern recognition. Mafella himself did not reject that view. He simply saw it as another dimension of the same truth. To him, science explained the mechanism, while faith illuminated the source. As his career matured, he took on fewer long-haul routes, preferring regional flights that allowed more time at home. Retirement loomed eventually, but he welcomed it with grace. He said that he would continue to fly privately, not for transport, but for communion, with the sky, with silence, with memory. In retirement, he planned to write a memoir, not of disaster, but of guidance. exploring how life's near misses reveal divine choreography. Those who met him in later years often described his presence as grounded, yet luminous. He had the calm of someone who had made peace with the unpredictable. His laughter was gentle, his speech deliberate. When asked what he had learned from all of it, he said, "To live 3 minutes earlier." It was his metaphor for mindfulness. Acting before fear or doubt hardens into paralysis. The story of pilot Ricoseta Mafella endures because it touches something elemental in the human condition. The desire to find coherence in chaos, to believe that even amid disaster, there can be alignment between instinct and purpose. It shows how one man's quick decision can ripple across thousands of lives, not just those he saved, but those who heard his story and reconsidered their own capacity to listen. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what do you think happened to pilot Ricoseta Mafella? What's your prediction? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.